Comic science and logic means there are a lot of things that don't make much sense.
Including death.
Welcome back, Nerd Squad. It's me, Amanda.
And I'm Adam, and today we'll be counting down the top 10 dumbest ways to die in Marvel Comics.
Which comic deaths do you find the most ridiculous? Number 10. Shot by a diamond bullet. This is actually a pretty smart way to deal with Emma Frost, but all in all a pretty dumb way for her to die when you kinda read it on paper. Both makes sense and doesn't make sense. I mean, Emma Frost has a diamond form, which makes her pretty much indestructible. For the most part anyways. So how does one defeat her when she's in her diamond form? Apparently by exposing the flaw in her diamond form and using the same material to kill her. How do you shatter a diamond? With another diamond, apparently. I don't know if that would actually work, but comic book science. Emma's diamond form is her secondary mutation, and while we've seen many attacks on her defended by this form of hers, apparently a diamond bullet can just insta-shatter her. I mean, I've heard of diamonds cutting diamonds, but never necessarily being used to completely shatter a diamond. If shot at her exact weak point though, apparently this is just what a diamond bullet can do, which is something one of the Cuckoos, Esme, knew about and exposed to kill Emma, mind-controlling mutant Angel Salvador to carry out the execution. Don't worry though, Jean, while merged with the Phoenix, managed to bring her back with Beast's help. Jean can do anything.
Number 9. Taken out by the Punisher. Some of the most creative forms of transportation to the afterlife come at the hands of Frank Castle, the Punisher. But at the end of the day, Frank is just one seriously messed up guy. A normal guy with a good chunk of training, a hell of an arsenal, and a little bit of creativity. He is not a match for a lot of the incredibly powerful beings out in Marvel Comics, but somehow we have the Punisher kills the Marvel Universe story. When his family were taken out by being bystanders of a superhero conflict, Frank is given the backing to take out all those who call themselves superheroes, and my god, a lot of these deaths make no sense, because of course they don't. He takes out the Hulk by waiting until he is Bruce Banner again, but that's never how the Hulk has worked in Marvel Comics. He took down Dr. Doom, with his only excuse for winning being that Doom stopped to give a speech, which does kinda make sense, but the worst example comes when he takes on the mutants. By the sheer will of lazy writing and Frank's throwaway explanation of manipulation, all the combined X teams are having their final battle against Magneto, Apocalypse, and their unholy alliance of acolytes and evil mutants on the moon in an air-sealed dome, which is where Frank drops a nuke on them, taking them all out. Ignore the fact that a good chunk of those here would be able to survive that kind of attack, and we're all good.
Number 8. EMP versus Phoenix Force. This has to be one of the most ridiculous ones. The Phoenix is typically known as being an unstoppable, undefeatable entity. I mean, the first time around, the only way that it was able to be defeated was basically by self-sacrifice. However, that hasn't stopped people from somehow banishing it or straight up killing the entity. Case in point, when Magneto defeated Jean Grey as the Phoenix by administering a powerful electromagnetic pulse, which gave her a planetary-sized stroke. Literally, those are the direct words from the comic. That is some major comic stuff right there. Only in comics would that happen.
Number 7. Being a part of X-Statix. Lots of deaths in X-Statix were stupid, but that was the point. The whole thing was a bit of a satire on reality TV. The team itself isn't exactly one of the premier mutant teams out in the world, and that's putting it lightly. The members of the team aren't exactly the most impressive. The original team made up of mutants Zeitgeist, who has the power of super puke, La Nuit, who has dark force powers, Battering Ram, who was a big purple goat looking man, Plasm, who had liquidy water powers, Gin Genie, who could create earthquakes depending on how much she drank, and Sluck, who is basically a squid. They went by X-Force, which as you may know shares its name with a much more impressive team. But all those original members, minus 3 of them who I didn't mention, and Sluck, who was blown up by a tank in South Africa, all got completely decimated in spectacularly embarrassing fashion during a rescue mission to save a pop music boy band named Boys R Us. Turns out their demise was actually planned by the team's manager, coach, and its leader, Zeitgeist himself, because they thought a team with a constantly changing roster and high body count would gain them fan interest. The team managed to go on with pretty horrible results. There have been 28 members of X-Statix who have passed away over their history, with only 9 of them surviving. So yeah, don't ever join this team.
Number 6. Eaten by birds. Miss Arrow has a pretty wild death in the comics. For those of you who are unfamiliar familiar or haven't heard of her, that is probably because you know her by a different name, the Other. That is right, Miss Arrow is actually the extremely powerful spider totem entity that is linked to Peter Parker's Spider-Man. As such, she is entirely made up of spiders, despite sometimes appearing to be human while under the guise of Miss Arrow. Because of this, she was at one time killed by a bunch of birds who devoured the spiders that made her up, with Peter squishing the final spider that survived the bird attack. This wouldn't be the end of the Other though, as one more day messed up the whole continuity thanks to reality being warped, with Peter having actually never accepted the Other in this alternate, which is now the main, reality.
Number 5. Being dumb. Magneto in the Ultimate Universe was like the bad guy. He was nuts, and he had the power to back it up, which he proved when he used his abilities to offset the magnetic poles, which put the whole world into chaos. Tidal waves in New York, mega flash freezes in Latveria, volcanoes erupting in the Amazon, all that good stuff. Naturally, the survivors were not happy, and they would be coming after Magneto with a vengeance. They aren't dumb, so of course their attack on the villain would be planned out. Right? Well, it doesn't seem like it was. While all the surviving heroes make their assault on Magneto's fortress, the hot-headed Warren Worthington, you know, the guy whose only power is that he has wings, decides that he is going to jump the gun and come full speed blasting through a window, giving Magneto a good old punch to the face. Magneto could have squashed this guy like a bug in one swift move, but he doesn't even think Angel is worth the effort. Instead, he lets Sabretooth, his mad dog, do the deed. Sabretooth pounces on him, rips one of Warren's wings off with his mouth, and then stomps on the mutant's neck, taking him off the board in one page. Idiot.
And friends, before we move on to our next spot, if you love hearing about weird, dumb deaths, well, we have a lot of weird things for you on our weirdest playlist, so go check that out. It's full of weirdness. Number 4. Waking up Fang Foom. Something you shouldn't ever do? Wake up a sleeping dragon, as Jerry Carpenter learned in Hulk vs. Fang Foom issue number 1, which admittedly is a pretty wild and weird story, so if you're into that, you should go check it out. Here, as promised, the two beings end up fighting, but first, we're treated to a story clearly inspired by John Carpenter's The Thing, probably also why this guy's named Jerry Carpenter. You see what's happening here? Except Fang Foom is the shapeshifter in this tale. For those who don't know, Fang Foom is actually an alien whose race is actually known for their shapeshifting abilities. I feel like not a lot of people think about that, but that is a thing. Needless to say, Jerry finds Foom below the ice and sends for the rest of his team up in the Arctic. They're basically like a research team, but instead of just waiting, he is hasty to proceed because he basically wants to name this newfound finding of what he believes is an undiscovered type of dinosaur after himself. He smashes through the ice with a pick, only to awaken Foom. Foom blasts forth and takes Carpenter for his host, basically wearing him like a skin suit. The really weird thing though is I think this is the only case of Foom like actually needing to do this. He claims he's attempting to rebuild his strength by merging with hosts and is like looking for a real strong host when he runs into the Hulk, but I don't think he's ever actually needed to do that before or after this point ever again. And he can just shapeshift on his own. He doesn't actually need a human host to turn into a human, so there's a lot of weird stuff happening in this comic. But hey, if you gotta make Hulk and Foom fight, I guess you gotta do some weird stuff.
Number 3. Falling on Rogue. Nothing stands up to falling on a woman who leeches life away, unable to pick herself up. Well, falling isn't the right word. It was more like Mr. Sinister was held down. Following the events of M-Day, a mutant named Hope Summers is born, bringing hope to the mutant species. Well, Mr. Sinister, he reassembled the Marauders and planned to control the future of mutant kind by stealing Hope. Sinister knew this and wanted to use Hope to control the mutant population because the mutants can't just have something without a villain trying to mess it all up. Sinister regrouped his Marauders alongside Mystique, who knew that Hope was necessary to save her daughter, Rogue, from her out-of-control powers. Well, Sinister failed to capture Hope, and like an idiot, he informs Mystique that he is unable to help her save Rogue. Safe to say that Mystique doesn't appreciate that very much. She grabs and shoves Sinister's face onto the unconscious Rogue, and unable to get up, his life is sucked away. Now I'll admit, it's a little bit awesome, but in the massive gallery of villains losing their life, it's arguably one of the lamest ones. Imagine Sinister having to tell people about this one when he eventually returns. Embarrassing.
Number 2, turned into a Sundae. I don't actually know if Ice Cream died here, but it certainly seems to be implied that he did. I'm just At least to me it does. This is the canon that lives in my mind. Ice Cream was a character who could turn into ice cream. Hence his name. Ice Cream, Ice Cream, get it? He infiltrated the X-Mansion in the first and only issue of Obnoxio the Clown. Speaking of weird comics, that's another one. He wanted revenge on the X-Men because they had cooler mutant powers than he did. Although how he really planned to get said revenge and beat them when his powers only allowed him to turn into ice cream, I'm not really sure. He attempted to turn the danger room on the students, but this plan ended up failing, with Professor X lowering the temperature of the control room to below freezing, which caused Ice Cream to freeze solid. At the end of the story, Obnoxio the Clown decorates Ice Cream as a giant sundae, while Ice Cream's fate is left ultimately undetermined. We never see him again, and it's possible that he literally could have met his end by being mistaken and consumed as actual ice cream at some point later in his life, so yeah.
Number 1. Just take off the quiver. A lot of the time when a hero's light goes out, it will be in an ultimate display of self-sacrifice, throwing themselves into impossible circumstances in order to save the majority. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, that kind of thing. It's the number 1 heroic move, but it only really works when there is absolutely no other option. When looking at Hawkeye's sacrifice in Avengers Disassembled, there were a whole handful of other options, and most of them were pretty obvious, making for a heroic self-sacrifice that just ended up coming across as incredibly dumb and unnecessary. Basically, Wanda Maximoff has gone completely bonkers and turned on the Avengers, but none of them know that just yet. She's already caused the passing of both Vision and Scott Lang, Ant-Man, and all the Avengers have assembled in order to figure out what the heck was happening. Using her Hex powers, she created a Kree warship to show up out of nowhere and go on the attack. Hawkeye runs off to go get some more arrows, and when he comes back, he goes off, taking out Kree left, right, and center until he is hit in his explosive arrow quiver by an energy weapon. With his quiver on fire and set to explode, instead of just taking it off or firing off the arrows, Hawkeye grabs a Kree with a jetpack and blasts off into the warship, blowing both it and himself clean off the battlefield. Just silly. Well, luckily being in the regular world, most of us will never have to experience any of these situations.
If you have any more incredibly silly one-way tickets to the afterlife in Marvel Comics, feel free to leave them down below.
But in the meantime, I'm Adam Andrews.
And I'm Amanda McKnight.
And we will catch you guys in the next one.
Bye! Bye!